Hey knitters, hopefully everything is working better today, but welcome to our live stream. Um, just checking everything, make sure I'm working here. When you're by yourself, you have to check things behind the scenes and make sure things are working. So please let me know if the volume is not working. Last week we had so many issues. I had some technical problems with the Wi-Fi and there was a storm, so I think between the two that might have been what was wrong, but hopefully we're better today. So let me know if everything sounds okay in the chat, please. I don't have anybody to check for me here. Everybody's gone. Even my dog is out laying in the sun. It's super cold. It's like I think only 2 degrees Celsius here, but the sun is like bright and shining. I'm like, ooh, it looks so nice. And then I open the door. I'm like, oh no, it's cold out there. But so I'd love to know where you are streaming in from today. And we've already got a few comments in the chat. Those who are here and waiting and ready to watch. I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that you're here. Sharon from A Life Well Crafted. Snowing and blowing in Cody, Wyoming. Oh, you've got snow. We don't have snow yet, but I don't think it's going to be too long. It's getting cold out there. And then Kitty's in sunny Virginia. Oh, and I would love some more sun here too. And then Evie in the Netherlands. Hi. And Vero in Germany. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. There's so many. It's so nice to see like an international audience here. And then Zeit Sandy from the UK. And okay, volume sounds good. Top Cat in Ireland. Goodness, we've got a lot of people across the ocean today. That's really nice. Thank you. Marilyn in Massachusetts. Donna in Sherwood Park, Alberta. Hey, Canadian. And Linda in New Hampshire. And Mary Ellen in New Jersey. Sunny and windy there too. Yeah, it's like that here. But thank you so much for popping in and chatting with me in the afternoon. I know this is a different time. Usually we're in the evening, but I guess more people that are over on the other side of the coast, this is probably a better time for you because in the evening would be like middle of the night, I think, right? If I'm getting my time zones correct. But I'm glad you're here today. We're going to talk all things stranded knitting, of dominant color dominance and floats and like my favorite resources. And we're going to talk about like the hierarchy of color work and see where stranded knitting fits within that. Because somebody asked about that and I was thinking that's really a great topic. I think we're going to have a video about that as well. But looks like everything is running just fine. I've got like a little video of I can see myself playing in the corner and like my hands moving, and so I got to block that so I can't see myself. But just to make sure it's playing at least. But the pattern. I would love to know which one, like how you're progressing with your knitting. We've got the 2 cowls, the November cowl, and which was almost named Lava Party because that was the name of the yarn, and then I changed it at the last minute. So I keep thinking of the other name first, and I have to stop and think about it. And then the Longshore Currents cowl. Oh, you can see the seam for that right there. Oh, Evie says it's 6 p.m. there. Yeah, it's afternoon here. So it's this is nice because I guess for those across the ocean, this is a better time for you as well. And Jillian is in northern BC, about 12-ish hours north of Vancouver. I'd love to go to Vancouver someday, or all of British Columbia. I'd love to travel all of Canada. But anyway, so hey Canadians, I see a couple of you here. And Valerie, hi from Florida, and Prairie in Nebraska, and Patty in California. I think CA is California. I have to remember all my state abbreviations, but tell me like how you're progressing with your cowl. Is everything going well? Any issues? I know we had some pop up in the community. Somebody had miscounted when she cast on and didn't have enough stitches, and she thought it was really narrow, and then I think she finished like maybe a whole round of the chart and was working on the next round before she stopped to count and realized, oh no, not enough stitches, so she had to start over. But I'd love to know how you're all doing with yours. Now if you're just getting started with the pattern, a lot of people are just coming into this now, you want to pair a gradient yarn. Well, you don't have to, but that's what I did with mine. Pairing a gradient yarn, I use Knit Picks Chroma, worsted weight for one, fingering weight for the other. You want to pair that with like a solid color, something that isn't the same color, or they'll sort of blend together, but solid complementary color. And then that color changing yarn does all of the work for you. Like generally in stranded knitting, you've got at least 2 colors, maybe more, sometimes a lot more. And you've got to change colors all the time. So you have lots of ends to weave in, and you've got to like start and stop and add colors and remove colors. And I like gradient yarns because you get lots of color without actually having to change yarn all the time. So you've only got like the 2 yarns ends to weave in instead of having lots of different colors going on. And I also like cowls that are knit like this because then the wrong side, all of the floats are sort of trapped inside. So both sides of the cowl look really nice. So that's another reason I love to knit them sideways in the round. It's just, I just like them that way. Okay, let me clean up my space here. I have so many things piled up. I'm just seeing if anybody's else is in the chat. Oh, Vero, you are stuck in the first row of the cowl because you're working on Christmas projects. I totally get that. I'm not actually doing any Christmas knitting this year, so which is nice because then it's just all for me. And Patty, you are stuck on socks. Oh, you're stuck like something's wrong. I hope you figure out what's going on with those. But yeah, a lot of people, I mean, it's that time of year. We've got Christmas knits to knit and other things, or if you're doing any like yarn advents, you might want to knit on that every single day. I haven't done one of those yet, maybe in the future. But I thought we would start this week with just talking about color work and the different types of color work. Like we're doing a stranded project, but like what that is compared to other types of color work that you might see in knitting. So I'm going to go to my overhead. Yes, it's working, woohoo. All right, so stranded knitting. I had to go find something that we could actually see the floats on this one. So stranded knitting, like it says in the name, you have strands of yarn across the back or floats. So all of these are like swatches and projects from the Master Hand Knitting program. I just pulled them all out so I could have some examples here today. So this one did not pass. I know that. I had to resubmit this one a bunch of times. But with stranded knitting, you have lots of different colors, as you can see here, and I had to weave them all in at the end. That's really a pain. But you're using generally 2 colors per round. And while you are knitting some stitches with one color, like this yellow right here in the middle, you're stranding that blue across the back. See, you can see the strand right there. It's stranded across the back. And then you knit the blue and you would be stranding the yellow. It would be a very short strand since it's just one stitch. So that's stranded knitting. And of course, this is different in different places. Like you have Fair Isle knitting, this is an example of that. The colors aren't really, Fair Isle colors are usually more muted in tone. And then you have like Scandinavian stranded knitting. And that is more like the nice bold colors and usually just 2 colors, but really high contrast, where Fair Isle is lots of different colors. And then there is like the Bohus sweaters, and then there's Icelandic yoke sweaters, which are also different. That's more like geometric designs using like Icelandic Lopi yarns that are like soft and fuzzy. And generally the colors are like sheep colors or more muted colors, not all the time. But so stranded knitting is like the overall term. Fair Isle is often used as like a term that's used instead of saying stranded knitting, but it's technically like one type of stranded knitting. Now, like not all Fair Isle or not all stranded knitting is Fair Isle knitting. Certain types of knitting are Fair Isle knitting. And that's where we get into like the topic of color dominance, because a lot of people will say, you know, that's a bad thing or it doesn't exist or whatever. It does exist, but it's specific to Fair Isle knitting. Not all stranded knitting discusses color dominance, but Fair Isle knitting does. So we're going to talk about that anyway. So that is like the color work we're talking about here with these cowls. But I thought it would be nice to like sort of show what like the other types of color work, so you at least get an idea of what they are. So another one would be intarsia. Like I think you can see the difference right away. It's big blocks compared to like these little tiny motifs. And if you were knitting along with this purple, you would not want to be holding this pink and then, or you know, like stranding that pink across this whole huge section. You'd have these long, super long floats. So instead you have like an individual ball of yarn. You'd have a purple ball of yarn. Down here you'd have a purple, a yellow, a pink, and a white. You'd have 4 little balls of yarn and they kind of hang from the back. And you just knit with the one you need, and then when it's time to switch colors, you twist them to lock them in place, or you're just going to have like 2 separate sections of knitting. Then you would knit the yellow, twist it with the pink, knit with the pink, twist it with the white, and then knit the white. So you wouldn't want to use stranded knitting for something with like these really large motifs, because you wouldn't want to strand the unused color across the back of such a large area. Now there is an exception. There's some stranded patterns where you do have large sections, and in that case you can use a method called ladderback jacquard, Gacquard. You can look that up. I think Suzanne Bryan here on YouTube has a really great video about that. So if you have a stranded project where there are some sections of really long floats, then a ladderback jacquard is a really great method for sort of catching those instead of trying to like catch them every few stitches, which can also mess with your tension. We're going to talk about catching floats later, but you wouldn't want to do that with big blocks of color. So this is what intarsia is like when you've got a pattern that has like big motifs. Think of like 80s sweaters with like those big florals or prints on them. That's probably done with intarsia. And then double knitting is also color knitting. I mean, it can be done with just one color technically, but it's another form of like knitting with more than one color. You're just knitting both layers of fabric at the same time with two different colors, and it's sort of a mirror image of itself. Then there's slip stitch knitting. And also within slip stitch knitting, there's mosaic knitting. So they're not the same thing. It's sort of like the stranded and the Fair Isle comment, like Fair Isle fits within stranded. The same thing here. Mosaic is like a subsection or a subset of slip stitch knitting. So slip stitch knitting you can do with one color, or you can do with two colors. You can do with more than two colors, and you're holding the yarn. In this case, it was held in the back, like you're only using one color at a time, and you're slipping the other color when you come to it, and then you work the next color and you slip the other color to get the pattern. So you're only ever using one color, but it still creates a colorwork design. With slip stitch knitting, you can hold the yarn to the back or to the front, whichever one. A lot of the designs will hold it to the front, and then you get like the floats of yarn. You would get those across the front of the fabric. It's really nice for texture. So another within that collection of slip stitch knitting is mosaic knitting, which was created by Barbara Walker. If you have any stitch dictionaries, she has a classic, like knitting designers, everybody seems to have at least one of Barbara Walker's stitch dictionaries. And her mosaic stitch dictionary is really great. So mosaic knitting is a slip stitch design, and it only uses two colors. The yarn's always held to the back, and it has like geometric patterns. That's like the thing that sets it apart from just slip stitch knitting. Your yarn is not ever held to the front. It's always held to the back, and it can be done in garter or stockinette. You could probably even do it in other stitch patterns if you wanted to play around with that. So we've got slip stitch knitting, which is probably easier than stranded knitting because you're only using one color at a time. Then there's also interlock, which you can do in lots of different colors. You can even add stitch patterns, but generally, you're going to see at least two colors with that too. And oh, here's another example from, these are all like swatches from the Master Hand Knitting program. I think most of them are like level 3. This was from level 2. This is intarsia again. So if you like argyle, then intarsia is the way to go. You want to learn how to do that. But this is what happens with intarsia. All of these ends to weave in, like lots and lots. The yellow, I think I did I do duplicate stitch? No, that was intarsia too. But so argyle patterns are, my daughter wants an argyle vest, and I keep putting it off because I know it's going to be a lot of intarsia and a lot of ends and all of the different balls of yarn for every section. But anyway, that's an overview of that. Let me see really quickly what's going on in the chat. Sharon is working on the November cowl. After completing about 10 rounds in the first repeat, I decided to change out my yarns as the original I picked didn't have enough contrast. This time I chose Spin Cycle. Oh, I hope that one's working better for you. And Zeit Sandy, I'm on November cowl and it's about 5 inches now. Oh, good job. A speckled yarn together with a plain yarn. I'm pleased with how it's coming out. That sounds really nice. I like combinations of different colors and different types of yarn. Chloe, hello from Miami. Oh, I hope the weather is nice down there. And Evie, Sockmatician has a great tutorial on the ladderback technique too. Oh, good. I don't think I've seen his. I really like the way he explains things, so I'm going to have to look that one up. And Evie, again, lovely swatches. Oh, thank you. Some of these were accepted. Some of them were not. Like they're not like done up to like a certain standard, you have to redo them. And I had to redo some of these. But anyway, so that is all the types of color work, so you get an understanding. a little overview of what that is. But of course, the cowl is specifically stranded. So we're going to talk about some of those things, like about stranded knitting, basically. So first of all, color dominance, it is a thing. You have your dominant color that's providing like the pattern. Now in this case, the black is providing the pattern. That lava party is like the background in here. And then black is making the pattern on top. And same with this, like the background color, I used the, can't remember the name of this color, Cousteau, I think. And then the white is creating like the shape of the waves. So when you're thinking color dominance, you're thinking of like the color that is creating the background, the color that is creating the pattern, and you want the pattern color to really stand out, basically. It's not an issue with your tension or anything like that. This is just something that's a part of Fair Isle knitting because the way they hold their yarns. They hold them the same way. Like the way to get the color to be dominant is that pattern color is always held to the left or it's held below the background color. And holding it there brings it closer to the fabric. And I'm not going to say it changes the size of the stitches, but just because of the way it's sort of placed against the fabric and it's always held in that same place, it makes that color a little more dominant in the pattern. It's not a tension issue. It's not something wrong with your knitting. It's just the way it is with Fair Isle knitting. Now, not all stranded knitting methods, like Scandinavian methods, they don't talk about color dominance at all. For them, it's not a thing. But they don't always hold their yarns the same way as Fair Isle knitters do. They often switch them. They'll knit with one, maybe drop that one, pick up the next one, knit some stitches with that, drop it, and pick the other one up, maybe under, maybe over. They never pay attention, or they don't always pick it up and work and hold the yarn in the same exact way. But Fair Isle knitting, they do. So this is where we get the dominant color. Just got to look at my notes, make sure I'm not leaving anything out. I said no tension issue. It's not about tension because people will say that a lot, like you have something wrong with your tension. You don't. It's just the way the yarns are held, like that one color that's closer to the work. There's something about holding it that way. I don't know what exactly, but it makes that color stand out a little more than the other color. Okay, now one big question is how can you tell which color should be dominant? Because sometimes, a lot of times, knitting patterns won't tell you which one should be. So I'm going to go back to my overhead and let me grab a knitting book here. One of my favorite resources. Now, what I like to do, like if I'm not sure, I will look at the chart and I will just grab a piece of paper and a pen and sort of like draw it out. And whatever you're drawing, that's probably your pattern color. So that's the one you want to be dominant. And if that doesn't help, another thing you can do is look at your chart and see which color is used sort of less often. That creates the pattern. The background color is often used more often in the chart, and the pattern color is used a little less. Okay, I'm just checking to make sure I haven't skipped anything about that. Oh, and one more. Yeah, I'm gonna go to look at here. Is especially what's really helpful is charts like this. Let me see if I can find one stitch pattern. Okay, there's a little section of some stitch patterns. You can really quickly tell which one is going to be the pattern color. Like the white squares are background. The pattern is the black dots. So that's really nice in a pattern if they have that, because you can tell right away which one is supposed to be the pattern and which one is supposed to be the background. If not, you can even like get a piece of graph paper and sort of do it yourself to try to figure out, okay, which one's pattern, which one's background, if it's all done in color, and then you can sort of figure it out that way. So when you are, if you want to play around with color dominance, now, I mean, I do hold mine like that. I'm just used to always holding my yarns in the specific hands. What you're going to do is think about the location that you're holding them. I'm gonna get my stitches all moved around here. So let's say the white is my background and the blue is my pattern. So if I'm going to hold them both in my right hand, which I cannot, I keep trying, then I would hold them like this. Like the blue is to the left, and as I'm knitting, it's going to be held below as I knit. So I would hold them so the blue is to the left, even if they're just in my right hand, and as they're worked, that blue is going to be held beneath the white. I can't really hold both, or otherwise I would show you what I mean. You could also do the same with your left hand. Hold them both in your left, which I also can't do. I'm used to holding one in each, so I'm going to show you how that works. But it would be the same thing. The blue, you would hold it to the left, and as you're knitting it, you would pick it up from underneath the white. You would pick the white up from over the top with the blue underneath, and that way it's always to the left and underneath the background color. That keeps us really close to the work. Now I like to hold them each in a different hand. I find that easiest. So my pattern color is on the left, my background color is on the right. So as you knit, I'm knitting my pattern color or background color. I'm not following my chart right now, I'm just going to knit. And then if I wanted to knit the other color, I'm making sure it's underneath the other, if I had them in the same hand, which I don't. And then this one comes above, I'm going to knit some white, and that comes above that blue. So that color always stays sort of as a background, and the blue stays as a pattern color. Does that all make sense? I'm going to go back over here and see if there's anybody else. Marcy in Wales, Denise in West Virginia, Monique in Maryland. Hello everybody, thanks for popping in today. Gail, another one in Canada. Hey Canadians. And Chase, my first stranded project was the Nahia hat, and understanding dominance helped me make sure that the single dots on top and bottom of the motif were equally visible by switching dominance. Yes, especially when you've got like, what is it called? The lice pattern, where it's like lots of background and then like little dots of one color. You really want to make those little dots like the dominant color so they're really noticeable. Otherwise they kind of get lost in there. But again, that's not with every, it depends on how you knit. If you want to knit with like the Fair Isle method, this is how they hold their yarns. Other places like Scandinavia, they will just be more random about it. So it's not such a big issue there. Anything else in here? Valerie, how do you correct row gauge? I once knit a colorwork hat and it was far too long, though it fit at the brim. You can't, and that's the one thing with stranded knitting. Like, I mean, if it's like maybe blocks of a smaller motif, you can do fewer of them compared to the pattern. But if it's like one long pattern, if your row gauge is different, then it's going to affect the project. There's not anything you can do about that. You can try changing needle materials. If you get like one gauge with like metal needles, then maybe try wood and see if that tightens things up a little on your row gauge. It might not. Sometimes changing materials affects the row gauge and not the stitch gauge. So you can try that out, but that's the one thing with stranded knitting. Your row gauge is actually pretty important because it will affect the length of the project, like a colorwork sweater. If your row gauge is a lot long, like you have less rows to the inch than the designer, and it's going to take you more length to finish that yoke, then the yoke is going to be a lot longer than the designer intended. You might have like a super deep armhole compared to the original one. Or the opposite, if yours is tighter, then it might be too short and you've got to like find some way to adjust that or just do some plain rounds in there. But stranded knitting is one of those times where your row gauge is actually pretty important. Okay, back to the chat. I've got to figure out how to put the chat on the screen, but keeping it simple this week to make sure everything's working okay. And Pam, hey, from Michigan. Karen in Ohio, hey. Kathy in Alaska, wow. That's really far away from me. Ellie in the Netherlands. And Love DIY, can these be done as mosaic? I don't see why not. You could give it a try. I have to think about that. My wheels are turning in here. Yeah, I don't see why you couldn't. It's just two different colors, so Sometimes it depends on how many stitches you have to slip. I really have to think about this one. I'm not sure. I wouldn't say every stranded pattern you could switch, and then again, you're doing it in the round, but usually with mosaic, you're doing every row twice, but with this, you could, it's going to change the pattern. I don't know. I think you could attempt it, and if you do, I would love to know how that works. And Jess in Northern WI, is that Wisconsin? I really got to get better on my abbreviations for the states. It's been a while since I've lived there, so I don't keep up. Okay, let's stop and let's do a giveaway. We've got quite a few people here, so I'm gonna give away the Fix Your Knitting Mistakes course, like a enrollment into that. So why don't you just leave a comment, type "fix" in all caps, and I'm just gonna randomly pick somebody. I'll wait a few minutes if you want. If you don't already have that class, it's just an online class. You take it on your own whenever you feel like it. You learn all about like reading your knitting, picking up like dropped stitches, tinking and not swatching. What else? Lifelines is in there. Like the big final assignment is dropping down to fix a section of lace. I think there's a section on fixing, like dropping down to fix increases and decreases, and well, even basic stitch patterns. It covers it all. So if you don't already have that course, then go ahead and just type "fix" in all caps. And I'm just gonna like close my eyes and just randomly pick somebody in a second. And then what you'll need to do when I pick somebody is you have to send me an email, hello@tanyaknits.com, or just go to like the YouTube about section for this channel, and my email address is there as well. And just send me an email telling me that you won and you would like your free access to the course. Fine print, YouTube is not sponsoring this giveaway or anything like that. It's open worldwide because it's online, so everybody can enter. So I'm just gonna like close my eyes and then look and pick one. The first one I see is PJ Barber. I can't put you on the screen, your comment, but PJ Barber, you're the winner. Email me hello@tanyaknits.com and just so I have your email address and I can give you access to the course. Let's go ahead and do one more. How's that? Let's say Donna Salvian. You're number 2. Donna Salvian, same thing. Email me and we will get you access to the course. And we're going to do this again at the end, so make sure you stick around for that. Okay, next I wanted to talk about color knitting resources. I've got piles of stuff here. I need to move some things over. I guess I don't need the overhead for that, though. I can just use grab my pile of books. Okay, for Fair Isle knitting, see, I've got a pile. I don't want to, I've got like a standing desk here, and I don't think it'll hold the weight of all these books. So one of my favorites for, well, all color knitting methods is probably this one, the color knitting, The Essential Guide to Color Knitting Techniques by Margaret Radcliffe. I think I have almost all of her books, and they're all really, really good, and definitely worth checking out. She has another one on finishing, and I can't remember what that one's called. That one's really good too. But this one is really great, and it covers more than just stranded knitting. So all of the ones we talked about already, you'll find information. I don't know if double knitting is in here. Along with, like, there's a fabulous section on variegated yarn and stripes and like just other ways to play with color. Shadow knitting as well, I think, is in here. And twined knitting, or twinned, I'm not sure how to say that one. But really good resource. Good section on stranded knitting as well. And another one I don't have, but I've gotten from the library multiple times, and I really should just buy it myself, is Mastering Color Knitting by Melissa Leitman. So that's Mastering Color Knitting. That one covers stranded, intarsia, and double knitting, I believe. I used that one a lot when I was doing the master's program. It was a really good resource. Now, for other books, let me see here. This one, Alice Starmore's Book of Fair Isle Knitting, I feel like this is like an encyclopedia. It's got a lot in here, but more than just details about how to do stranded knitting. There are like the stitch patterns, the ones I showed you, like just the black dots, tons of those in here. A really good section on choosing color. If that's like an issue, like trying to choose colors for stranded knitting projects, then there's a good information about that in here. There's even a section in the back on designing like your own sweater or your own tam. And I use that when I was working on my master's program a lot because I did a Fair Isle tam. Historical information. I'm trying to think what else. There's a lot in here. It's not like I don't just sit down and read this one, but it's a really good reference book when I need to reference something. And all of the techniques too, like stranded knitting technique stuff. So Alice Starmore's Book of Fair Isle Knitting. Really good resource for stranded specifically. Now, if you're looking for something a little more fun, like you like to do, like you have sort of your go-to basic patterns, like maybe just a plain sweater pattern that you love, or like a plain hat pattern, and you want to add something to it, like popping in a colorwork motif is really simple. You just have to figure out the math. Like if you know the math for the circumference of your hat and you find a motif that will fit within that stitch count, then you're good to go. So if you like to do stuff like that, I have some book recommendations for you. These are specifically stitch dictionaries. So Mary Jane Mucklestone has 2 of them that I like, 200 Fair Isle motifs and 150 Scandinavian motifs. I really like these are kind of like the colors I like, where it's really high contrast like that. I like those. So she has 2, and these are just filled with those color charts and also like the dotted charts. So you can really see, okay, this is pattern, this is background. And another one I really like is Knitivation, and also her other one, I have a digital copy, I don't have the physical, is Alternate is the name of it. So these are by Andrea Rangel, I don't know. But these, you can see some of the swatches on the front. It's really fun. I really like, feels like more of like a modern take on stranded knitting instead of, like the Alice Starmore book is like all of the really classic designs. And these are, like, look, there's a dragon here, and little pandas, and they're more, I don't know, modern fun things that you'll find in these books. So these are really fun as well. And these are charted. That's the one thing you're going to see with all of the stranded knitting things is you don't often see like it written out with written instructions for the charts. They're always charted is what I mean. You're not going to find written instructions for the charts. You can sometimes, but definitely not as common. Oh, okay, I'm talking a lot. Okay, how are we doing over there? Everybody good? Claudia and Chili, hey. Congrats to the winners. Yes, yes. Monique, you love Margaret Radcliffe books. Need to add this one to your library. Yes, you do. I have all of her books except for the Knitting Answers book, like the little one. And I've gotten that one multiple times from the library, but I've never bought it. But I have her others, and they're all like just packed full of information. Sometimes when I just want to like read some knitting stuff, I don't know, sometimes I do that. I don't know. Do you do that? I will take one of her books and I'll sort of like sit in bed and read a little bit before bed. But it's one of her books are like, they're so technique and so much depth. You don't just sit and read the whole thing. Like you would look for a certain section and read that, I find at least. Like it's just too much to try to hold in my brain all at once, but just really good books. I'd like to take a class with her someday. Checking. Oh, Donna, email address. Hello, HELLO, at Tonya Knits, TONIAKNITS.com. Also, you can go like right here on YouTube, go to like the About section for Nerdy Knitting, and my email address is right there too. Like you can just click, it should be like on the About page, like a way to click on the email address. We're doing really simple today, but like streaming software I've used in the past, you could put things on the screen, and I can't do that with this one. I haven't figured out how. I'll get to that eventually. But so we just have to do things manually today. And just ordered the Radcliffe Colorwork book. You'll love it. Believe me, I love that book. I use it so much. Oh, it's 41% off on Amazon right now. Ooh, Christmas stocking stuffer. Well, we do books at home here. Christmas Eve is always a book and new pajamas. So I already have that one, so I'm not putting it on my list, but I have to go pick out a Christmas Eve book, and it's usually something knitting related. And Lost Child, late, but hi from Istanbul. Hey, well, you're still here. That's good. Okay, so next thing I wanted to talk about was managing floats, because that's another big topic when we talk about, where is my little stranded knitting swatch here? When you talk about like all these different colors and you have those strands of yarn inside, you have to learn to manage them. They're called like strands, they're called often called floats, because you're floating one color on the inside. So I'll just keep it on the out like that. So you're floating that color while you're using the other one. And if probably your first project, if this is your first, maybe it's happened already, it's very common to like knit with one color, and then when you finally knit with the other, you kind of pull it tight and then you start knitting. You don't want to do that with stranded knitting because it's gonna like pull everything in. It causes a big pucker. You can't block it out. If you've pulled it tight, then that float is too short and no blocking is going to help that at all. I did that on my first project. It's very common to do that when you're just learning how to do this. You actually want to do the opposite. You knit with one color. I'm going to go to the overhead and show you what I mean. So you knit with one, what have I been knitting with? The white. So you're knitting away with that color, and then I have to knit with the next color. So what I'm going to do is actually pull these apart, stretch them apart. So that blue, instead of going like this, like holding everything really close and tightening up before I knit that blue stitch, which is going to make a super short float with the blue yarn on the back, I want to spread these stitches out a lot. Make that, well, I'm not like making them go further than they want to, but I'm making sure they've got room. And then I'll start knitting with that blue. So I have this, you can see there's the float right there, not the white, the blue, right here. It's floated across the back. I can even fit my finger in it if I want to. But that is actually a good float. I mean, my finger will go in, which isn't great if you're knitting a sweater and you're trying to put your hand in your sleeve. But you can adjust it. Like I've only knit one stitch, so I can give it a little tug if I think it's too loose, and then knit the next stitch. But after that, I can't adjust it. So if I were to knit that first stitch and then I pulled on it and tightened that up and then kept knitting, then I made that float really short. Like I could still sort of cram my finger in there, but it's going to, if I keep doing that, then the white portions are going to pucker. Like they're gonna pull all in because I made the blue floats way too short. So you want to actually stretch those stitches out when you're switching colors and give them some room and make your float not super long. You don't want it to be dragging around, but you want to be able to keep the tension of your stitches. You don't want them all tightened up and puckered because your floats are too short. So that's the biggest thing, is don't like tighten up when you're switching colors. If I switch back to the white, then I kind of stretch the blue out before I knit the white stitch. And I make sure it's got a lot of space. That float is nice and long back there, and then I can keep knitting. So I'm just going to finish this part right here. Okay, so when it comes to doing your floats, there, sorry, got a little frog in my throat. So don't pull on the yarn, that's going to pucker, and you can't take it out. Once you've like tightened it up, that's just the way it's going to be. I always see questions, will blocking fix this? No. No, it's not going to fix a too tight float. Like that's already tight, you're not going to be able to stretch that out. So sorry, I don't mean to say it like in a callous way, but it's not. I just see the question so often that no, blocking is not a miracle worker. It won't do something like that. That is just something you have to learn. My first project was the same. I did everything too tight and it was all puckered up, and there was no blocking on earth that was going to fix that. Now you can catch the floats if you need to. If you're doing a long section of one color and you want to make sure that you're going to end up with like a strand of yarn, or that float is going to be more than an inch, then you can catch the yarn on the back of the work and then continue on with that white color. This can work, but you have to be careful because it can affect your tension. Sometimes when you're catching it, it can peek through to the right side of the work, especially if your gauge is a little on the loose side. Firmer gauge is going to be more able to hide. But on a looser gauge, you can like see where you caught it. It can happen. Very common to have that happen. It's very common for it to affect your tension. It's going to affect like how the fabric stretches. Stranded knitting doesn't stretch as much as regular. Like I've got a cardigan back there, really nice and stretchy, plain stockinette. The mistake rib stretches really well. If there were the hat on top, on the other hand, has a band of stockinette or a band of colorwork stranded knitting in it, and that is not going to stretch as much because you have those floats of yarn. Like they're only going to go so far. So even actually for that hat, when I designed it, I did like the ribbing and then there's a little section of stockinette. Then I actually increased a bunch of stitches just for the stranded knitting part. And then after that band was done, I decreased all those stitches because my gauge, not my gauge so much, but the stretchiness of the fabric, when you're especially in a hat, you need to make sure it's stretchy enough for the head, but stockinette, it's going to be more stretchy than like your stranded knitting. Stranded knitting is only going to stretch so far, not very far at all. So when it comes to choosing like a size, you want it to be maybe the size of the head, like choose it instead of knitting one that's smaller than the head. If there's a lot of stockinette or a lot of color work in it, stranded knitting, then choose one that's closer to the head size because it's not going to stretch as much. And like a regular hat, stockinette, rib, it's all going to stretch really a lot. Same with socks. Like when you're knitting plain socks or ribbed socks or something like that, 10% or so less, like the negative E's, smaller than your foot, and it's going to stretch and stay in place. With a stranded knitting sock, you probably want to choose one that's actually closer to your foot circumference because it's not going to stretch as much. I got way off talking about catching floats though, didn't I? But in these the cowls for our project though, none of the floats are more than an inch. Like the longest I think is like 7 stitches in the fingering weight, and that's less than an inch. So you don't need to catch any floats. That's like the rule of thumb, is if you're trying to figure out where you should catch floats by looking at the chart or whatever, I like to look at the chart and see, is there any area that I'm going to be stranding that yarn for more than an inch, and then I'm going to think about placing, like catching floats in those places. But less than that, I don't really care. I don't use like a specific number of stitches because it depends on what you're knitting. Like if they say like 6 stitches, that's one thing. If you're doing something with sock yarn, 6 stitches is definitely less than an inch. If you're using extra bulky, 6 inches or 6 stitches could be like 6 inches. like that would be a huge float. I don't know if I would knit something with stranded knitting and bulky yarn, but anyway, so I don't use the stitches so as a guide so much as like an inch. What in the pattern you're using constitutes like an inch of stitches. Is it 8? Is it 6? Is it 5? It's going to change depending on pattern, and that will be sort of my guide about catching floats. Before I decide if I'm going to even catch any, then I'll decide if they need to be, if it's, and everything in these particular cowls is like less than an inch, so you don't have to catch any floats at all. And but we've got time, I'll demonstrate how to catch them if you want to practice on the cowl or any other future projects. But if they're super long floats, I don't have a guideline for like the inches. I think you'd have to play it by ear. If it just feels, if you can fit all 4 fingers or whatever you're wearing, if it feels like you're going to catch on those floats, even if you're sort of catching them behind, you don't want to like have a big section of one color being caught along the back of the work, then definitely look into that ladder back jacquard. So Suzanne Bryan has a video, and Nathan Taylor, Sockmatician, has a video. Okay, so we're going to go to the overhead and I'll show you like how I catch floats. There's other ways as well. I did an article on this actually. If you're the Knitting Guild Association, if you're a member, there's an article in there with pictures talking about some more methods. Okay, let's see what's happening in the chat. 41% off that book, yes. Marcy, I thought that name rang a bell. I have the Knowledgeable Knitter book. That's the other one. I love that one. That one's really good. And Monique, Tanya's Fix Your Knits course is fabulous. I learned a lot. Oh, thank you, Monique. That's really nice. And AP Nans, love all the books. Oh, I know. I love knitting books. Well, I like books altogether. Okay, Ellie, in the Netherlands in the 80s, all colorwork was called jacquard. Yes, I've seen some old knitting books that call it that too. I learned since 2 years ago when I started knitting again that there are a lot of different types names. Yeah, I've got a few older knitting books, and that's what they call. They don't say like stranded knitting or farrow knitting. They call it jacquard. But I don't really use that one now, except for like the ladder back jacquard. We call it that. Just making it. Tanya, do you go up a needle size for colorwork areas when a project has a mix of colorwork and solid? Yes, I do. I definitely do that. That was one, when I was designing the hat, that was my other thought, was which one do I want to do? Do I want to increase stitches, or do I just want to go up a needle size? And I tried that, but I didn't really like the fabric because it was a little too loose, and I wanted a nice firm hat. So I changed the stitch count. But if I'm doing somebody else's pattern, like I'm just knitting, then Yeah, that's generally what I do is I'll go up one needle size. But you have to check with your own stranded gauge. Like you might not have to. Your gauge might stay the same. You might actually like tighten up, so you'd want to go up a needle size. You might actually get looser, so you might want to go down a needle size, but you won't know until you actually like try it yourself to see. But yeah, I do usually change needle size. And Vero says 1 inch equals 2.54 centimeters. Yes, I'm a mix of imperial and metric, and yes, so same. So your floats, if they're 2.54 centimeters or less, no need to catch them. When they get longer than that, you might want to consider it. So we're going to go to the overhead and we'll talk about that. Let me get my Post-its out of the way and everything else. Okay, so it's not hard, it's just a little finicky. So I don't love trying to catch my floats. It's not fun. All right. So let me just knit a few in white. So this is like if you have yarn in both, there's so many different ways to do this. I'll try to, okay, so if I want to catch, let's say I want to catch the blue, the one in my left hand. I'm going to insert, put the yarn on, but I'm not going to knit it. I'm going to bring the yarn I am using around like that. See, it's the opposite direction. Take this one back off. And you can see now it's laying on top of that yarn. You could just do that instead if you want. It's probably easier. And then pull it through. And then when you knit the next stitch, because it's still just kind of there, it's not really caught yet. You knit the next one, you can see it's going to be caught. Now it's sort of trapped between these two white stitches. So that's what you do when the float you want's in your left hand, or the yarn to the left, you're going to bring it up the wrong way. So over the top of the needle. And then like you're going to work a knit stitch like that. Sorry, my hand was in the way. See if I can keep my hand off to the side. And then take it off and then knit. So that is if you could do the same. I'm not going to even try to attempt it. If both yarns are here, you would do the same. Like catch that one and then knit with that. Oh, did I do it? I think maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I did. I caught it. Woohoo. And then knit the next one. And that would be how you would catch it. If it's the yarn to the left. So no matter what hand it's in, oh, I'm really making a mess now. Get that one off there. If the yarn is in your left hand or it's just the yarn held to the left, that's how you're going to catch it. So if we do the opposite, get a few blue stitches here, and I want to catch the white yarn, then let me try to remember. Sometimes I have to think about it. I think it's from underneath, yeah. And then from underneath, and then take this one back. And you see it's sort of trapped under there. It's not caught yet. It's just kind of hanging out there. But when I knit this next stitch, you can see it's going to be caught under the float between the stitches. So I'll do that one again. So you can do this the same if you have both yarns in your right hand. You would, I can't do it though. It's not going to be possible for me. Bring it up like you're going to knit, but you're not going to knit. Then bring the blue, which you are going to knit, and take the white back off. And you can see it's like twisted with that yarn. And then knit, it's not really caught yet. We're going to knit the next stitch, and that catches it in place. And same thing applies. Like you don't want to be pulling tightly on the yarn you're trying to catch the float. You want to keep it nice and loose as you're working it. Does that all make sense? There are other ways to do it as well. Like you can just simply lay the yarn, like lay the yarn that you want to float just over the length of the yarn you're working. That's really easy to do. But if you can manage to hold them both at the same time, then you can like sort of pick one and pull it back off as you knit the other stitch. I hope that makes sense. But for super long floats but you wouldn't want to do that. Yeah, if you have like a long area of one color, and you're going to have to catch your floats like 3 or 4 times, that's really too much. So you're better to look at something like ladder back jacquard, or make sure you're not looking at a pattern that's for intarsia and trying to do it with stranded knitting, because you don't want to do that. They're two very different things. Okay, so we've got time for a little Q&A before we wrap up. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to just look over here. Jess Making It says, I find that I need to go up a size for DK worsted and 2 sizes for lace sock weight. Yeah, that makes sense because of the size of the stitches. That makes a lot of sense. Karen, do you change needle size only because of gauge or because it might need to be more stretchy in the color work or to make the floats looser? All of the above. Because when I do stranded knitting, my tension, I'm tight, like it's a little more tight than my stockinette gauge. And because it doesn't stretch, same thing, it doesn't stretch as much as stockinette. And if I want it to stretch, like in the case of a hat, then I've got to do something to adjust that. And what was your other one? Or to make the floats looser. Not so much that one. I'm good on my floats, but yes, because my gauge is different. That's very common, just to have a different gauge in stranded knitting. If you don't, then good for you. That's really fabulous that you have the same gauge with both. A lot of us don't have that, and we have to make exceptions or tricks or do something somewhere to adjust things when we have a combination of stockinette and stranded knitting. I was going to say stockinette and garter stitch. That's not what I meant. Too many things managing at the same time. My brain can't keep up. Jess Making It says, personally, I go up needle size to keep the gauge the same. Yes. Karen Albury, separate video on catching floats. Well, I just demonstrated it, but I should make a note. That would be a good video to have. I'm sure there are some, like somebody must have done videos on that, but I'll try to think of writing it down or something. Jess Making It, sometimes it helps keep the stretch, but mainly I do it for gauge. Yeah. Yeah, for stretch, it depends on the project. Like with a pair of socks, because it needs to go over your foot. So stranded knitting is not going to stretch, so you probably want to pick a size based on your foot circumference and not like much smaller than your foot circumference. Where like a regular sock, 10% ease is, or even like an inch of ease or negative ease, smaller than your foot is what you want. Or in the case of a hat, same thing. If you want it to fit a head, like the stranded section could suck it in too much and it won't fit over your head. That happens. That was my first project, was a hat, and that happened. And Joy, sorry if you covered this. I had to pop away for a little. Do you ever turn the work inside out to allow a bit more stretch? If so, could you demonstrate the technique, please? I don't do it personally. I'll try. I've never done it. So let's see. If anybody has, please leave your information, like how you would do that, down below. But would you take the whole thing and just put it inside out, is my guess. Oh my, I don't know if I can do this. Like it feels all turned around. Like that's where I want to work. This is where I want to do my work. But I need to, I don't know if I can do that. I've never done it. My brain does not want to seem to process that. But I know it's a method, so if that's something you want to try, definitely give it a try, because it can like help you loosen things up if you need to. I'm sorry, I just can't figure that out, Joy. Like I think I need to see somebody do it so I can understand how it's done, because I'm assuming you want to turn things inside out, but then it feels like everything's the wrong way. So I'm not sure about that, but there must be somebody that's done it somewhere, so you could find something on YouTube, I'm sure. Okay, so I'll see if anybody has any last few questions there, but let's do one more giveaway. Same thing, the Fix Your Knits course. Just type, I'm not going to go scroll back up to look for the thing, so just type Fix in all caps again, and we'll just randomly pick one person. And also, I'm going to do this for the replay. So if you're watching the replay, then when the video is over, you can leave a comment down below the video, not in the chat. So even if you were here, go ahead and leave a comment down below. I don't care. That you're entering for the Fix Your Knits course giveaway. So we'll do one here. So just type Fix in all caps in the chat. I'll give you a second to do that. And if you're watching the replay, we'll do the same thing. So leave a comment below the video, not in the chat, just saying you want to enter the giveaway for the Fix Your Knits course. Like I said before, YouTube is not sponsoring this in any way. It's open worldwide because it's an online course. You can access it from anywhere. I will have like full rules for giveaways in the description box, because that's mandatory on YouTube to have all of the disclaimers. So for the live chat, I'm going to do one right now. And then for the replay, I'm going to wait until Thursday to give people a couple days to watch the video. So November 14th, I'm going to leave a comment under your comment, because I can't like email people on YouTube. So I'm just going to leave a comment under your comment, and you have 24 hours to get back to me telling me that you want the course with your email address so I can give you access to it. Okay, so I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm going to look. Joy, I love that name. That's my daughter's middle name. fix. Yes, you got it in there. So Joy, go ahead and email me at hello@tanyaknits.com, and I will get you access to the course. And I think that's it. Does anybody else have any questions before we wrap it up for today? Oh, there's a few more. Jess says, I have turned mine inside out. I turn the whole thing inside out, then work one on the side that is front facing, which is further from you. That's it. Okay, that makes sense to me because it felt like it was all in the wrong place. So you work on the side that's further away. Okay, I'm not going to try to attempt it again, but my brain, I'm going to try it though. I think I'm going to give that a try. That sounds like a good technique. I'm like you, Joy. I can't get my head around it based on no, I know it's a thing, but I have to see it done, I think. I'm gonna sit down and try it out. And Jess says, I didn't find inside out helpful enough to warrant dealing with loose floats where I would sometimes catch them on my finger or needles. Okay, so it's something to try, but yeah, it might not be the best method. Maybe just learning to like stretch out the sections of stitches when you're doing your floats would be good enough. And Kathy says, I like the way you explain things. Thank you, Kathy. And congrats to Joy. And oh, she also says to Jess, I will try at home. Thank you. And thanks for the giveaway. Good. Well, that's it for today. I don't think we have anything else. There's no other questions there. So if you want to enter again, then go ahead, not in the chat, but when the video is when he stops streaming, you can comment below the video to enter the giveaway there as well. And I'll wait till Thursday to pick that giveaway winner. But that's it for today. We are meeting again next week on Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. and wrapping up our knit along. So keep knitting on your cowls or your Christmas knits or whatever you're working on, and I'll see you next week.